Thank you. Can start. Welcome everyone. And for today, we have a lot on our agenda. And then for today's scope will be on the physical resilience. But we have a guest speaker that will help us basically guide through it and then introduce. Is Larry Jura here right now?
Yes, I am.
So that's why it's okay. So for a second,
L0, code name
yes,
L0.
exactly L0. Yes, you're right. Yeah, so maybe you can give so I put some on the agenda. Of course, you don't have to follow this exactly, but maybe you can kind of talk about like some of the overview of the physical resilience scope, because I think there's some of the members, including some of the ABC members, were really confused what it actually cover, as well as like you can talk about like why is this scope important, as well as sort of talk about the legal defense fund, which I know that many are very curious about, like some of the overview, like how's the progress, and what have been the areas that can be improved and has been doing well, if you can share, as well as like maybe we can talk about like, for example, how it also relates to growth strategy for ABC. So yeah, and then maybe you can just start by maybe introduce yourself, because we do have some of the newer, I think, delegates or others who might not be familiar with the role they you do for the
Sure thing. And thank you very much, though, for the invitation to this ABC meeting. My name is Layer Zero. I am permanent contributor at the SCS core unit. I have been in charge of a bunch of very interesting legal projects. The most important of these legal projects is the Legal Defense Fund, which I will describe very briefly, and have been also contributing to write some of the components of the physical resiliency scope. So I see as part of my mission to help develop a proper legal risk management strategy for MakerDAO. I think that's one of the important things that should be included in the scope: legal risk management, legal risk mitigation, legal processes, how to manage and coordinate legal work in the context of DAO, in the context of endgame. So those are like very, very broad topics. I prepared some slides. If I can present, or if you give me sharing rights.
Can we give a Layer Zero sharing rights? Like, is it possible to give him admin power? And I'm really sorry, I'm pretty boomer at this. I can't even fix my laptop. So, anybody know how to give him the power?
Okay, co-host.
So seems like they give you the power.
So do you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you.
Very well. Okay, do you see my screen and can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you well from this screen.
Okay, very good. So I already introduced myself, Layer Zero from the SCS core unit. First, I have to start with a typical disclaimer. When we talk about these topics, nothing in this presentation should be considered as legal or financial advice. So I have two topics to cover for today. I want to start off with the Resilience Fund, aka the Legal Defense Fund. That's a project that is very advanced and is technically already operational. So I want to show you how it works, how it will be important in the broader context of mitigating legal risk for participants and also for managing legal risk for the organization. And in the second part, I'm going to give you, share some ideas about some general topics, other topics besides legal defense that could be important for the physical resilience scope. So what is the Resilience Fund? The Resilience Fund is a self-insurance instrument fully controlled by Maker governance, which will cover legal defense expenses in case of a legal or a regulatory action. Currently, this rule set is contained in MI 109, Articles 3 and following. And as you already know, the scopes will be merged. The physical resiliency scope will be merged with finance and ecosystem into the support scope. So under Article 10, support scope is the current version of the Resilience Fund. This Resilience Fund includes two very important processes that we're going to develop in the course of the next months and years. The first one is a process for funding legal defense, that is the Resilience Fund. The second one that is still in development and is also adjacent, is complementary, is the process for executing legal defense. So we need both things. We need a proper system, a process for funding legal defense when we need it, but we also need a process for executing this legal defense. And this include two types of processes, include process against participants or persons that are active members of the DAO, or against the DAO itself. And as you all know, and that will be part of the second part of the presentation, defending the DAO. So right now, there are some lawsuits and regulatory actions against DAOs. And DAOs, because of their structure, are more vulnerable than traditional corporations. And it seems to be like a disadvantage for DAOs in comparison to centralized organizations. Centralized organizations have a legal entity that provides some liability protection to members, also have proper governance processes and have legal counsel and have a lot of other resources. We have to reinvent that for the DAO, and very, very soon. Actually, I think that, and always taking into account that the advisory council, that is a priority to select advisory council. Remember, this is an area that is the next one, besides the Legal Defense Fund, is developing these processes, the SOPs, standard operational processes, how to defend the DAO if the DAO is target, how to defend participants is less new, because in that case, there will be like an individual defendant, which will be responsible for organizing its own legal defense. And what we want to do with the Legal Defense Fund is transfer some of this risk to the DAO itself, so the DAO fund its legal representation or legal defense for activities that related to MakerDAO. The budget is 5 million DAI per year, and all claims are processed according to a claim procedure manual, which is included in Article 10.4 of the support of the new support. If it's approved, if the governance all approves it, it will be the new support scope. This rule set that you see here is one part. It's not still the whole thing, but it's the result of more than 1 year of work with two companies, Gallagher, which is a very large insurance broker, and Artex, which is a risk management project company in Bermuda. We at SES, we give them a grant for executing a feasibility study for self-insurance instruments, for structuring a self-insurance instrument for managing legal risk for MakerDAO. So what you see here is the result of expert professionals and of long work with these two companies. So I want to talk about what is self-insurance, because the Legal Defense Fund is structured as a self-insurance instrument. Self-insurance is a professional risk management technique that consists in setting funds aside for compensating a possible future loss. Technically, self-insurance is a tool for retaining risk and not transferring risk. So in this sense, it is different than traditional insurance. In certain sense, it's the opposite as insurance. In traditional insurance, you transfer risk to a third party, you pay them a premium, and they assume this risk. In self-insurance, you retain risk in the organization. And self-insurance can be used as alternative or as a complement to traditional insurance. That's what we want to do in this context. Also importantly, it is not considered a regulated activity. Normally, insurance, when you transfer it to third parties, this is licensed. You require license. That's regulated. Self-insurance, the funds are managed by the organization, so they don't require, are not considered a regulated activity. So when they are used in traditional corporation, it is a well-known technique in the traditional corporate world, when you cannot transfer risk through traditional instruments such as insurance, and that's the situation in crypto. If you have tried to get something like a D&O insurance is a liability insurance that have directors and officers of traditional corporations, even though they have a liability shield through the legal entity, they also have exposure to personal liability. And the annual insurance is the name of this insurance that provides liability protection for directors and officers of traditional corporations. That to have it encrypted is extremely difficult. Other interesting component is that service insurance are fully customizable and can be tailor-made to the specific needs of decentralized organizations. And you can cover almost every risk, of course, like not ethically or illegal things. You don't want to cover that, but besides that, it is very, very open and very flexible, in contrary to insurance instruments where you have like more templates that are, you have less room to negotiate conditions than with self-insurance instrument that could be fully customizable. So this instrument, we expect this instrument, we have the first version now in the MIB 109 to be developed and for you AVCs to help us develop with time what should be included in there. And I will explain how could this instrument be developed in the future. One interesting component is that these self-insurance instruments can be leveraged to cover additional risks or extend coverage to additional stakeholders. It will be the first building block of a comprehensive legal risk management strategy for the maker ecosystem. The key facts: who is covered? Covered are core contributors and governors. So we want to cover two types of persons. Persons in the old structure who were recognized delegates, core unit facilitators, or contributors. And in the new structure, aligned delegates, aligned voter committee members, co-facilitators, and active MKR or DAO token holders. This last category is, we want to also provide coverage to persons that provide certain service to MakerDAO that is not directly compensated. So maybe like VCs or other, like right now, many of them are being now active in AVCs, but we want to leave this category open for other type of players that have provided or have assisted MakerDAO in some way. So those are the 7 different groups of beneficiaries. The risk is the fund will cover legal defense and representation expenses. We don't want to cover everything. We want to exclude willful criminal conduct. I think that is obvious. We want to exclude also conflicts between MakerDAO participants. So it would make no sense to provide funding to conflicts between internal people. We want to exclude conflict of interest and also past or pending claims. The one is very important. We are not going to cover past or pending claims. The legal case or the regulatory case has to be in the future. With the ratification of MIB 109, the Resilience Fund is technically operational. We will develop the process that you see in MIB 109 is like a first version of the process, which will be developed further and further in further iterations. We want to implement in the next one an onboarding process that will require that the beneficiary provide a cryptographic proof of eligibility. For example, for a delegate, we want to do it as automatized as possible and also anon friendly. So that, for example, delegates have to sign a message with an address that deployed a delegate contract, for example, or for a facilitator, it could be to sign a message from an address that signed that multi-sig, for example. We know all the multi-sigs of were used for core units. That's as an example. So we are developing that, and we are going to include it in the next version. The claim procedure, how it will work in like very overview, high-level overview. The beneficiary, if somebody is target of a legal action and requires legal counsel, each person is responsible for organizing its own counsel. In the future, I think that should change and that will change, because I think we need to develop structures and processes for providing immediate. We want the best litigation lawyer to be available in case somebody is target, but we are not there yet. So until now, the idea is that it will be more like a reimbursement. So the person that is target should organize its legal defense, pay out his legal counsel, or at least get a quote from that. And all the supporting documentation, the facilitator will make a formal check, and this will be sent to a technical committee. The technical committee is composed by, we have the specific requirements, insurance experts in insurance, in risk management, expert in self-insurance instrument. This will check the merits, and we have 1 week for deciding the claim and submit a recommendation. And then the facilitator can trigger a governance poll in the weekly cycle to perform a payout. The next steps, we want to leverage this resilience fund. The resilience fund, as I briefly explained, can be used as a first layer for getting other insurances that would be otherwise unavailable, for example, The resilience fund in particular can be used as a junior tranche that takes the first loss in case of a claim, in this case, up to 5 million, and external underwriters can provide additional coverage in excess of these 5 million. This is very interesting. We already approached some months ago the insurance market, and there is some appetite in the market to provide additional coverage or even to provide other type of coverage, like for example, D&O, if we maintain a fund that takes this first loss, this junior capital, which is very, very interesting. It's possible to gradually extend coverage to cover additional risks like D&O or like regulatory risk of MakerDAO or whatever ABCs and maker token holders decide as priority to cover. But we also can cover additional stakeholders. So as you see, the beneficiary group in the new structure include like people in core, but we could consider extending coverage to ecosystem actors or to users. Why not think of having some type of like FDIC insurance for depositors or things like that? So we can offer coverage for users or for clients. That will be an interesting development also. So it's very versatile, and it all depends what are the strategic priorities in developing these instruments. And in this way, the resilience fund can be a key building block for a more comprehensive legal risk management strategy to be developed. One possibility would be to have a cross-industry DAO-wide fund, so that this fund in the future is used not only to absorb legal risk from the maker ecosystem, but also from other DAOs. I have been presenting this project in different scenarios and crypto legal events. There is an huge interest in other DAOs that are looking at what we are doing with this legal defense fund. We are doing it in a very structured way and proactively, not reactively. So other projects have developed reactively defense funds. We want to have this in place before something happens. And possible next steps is to develop the part of the organization. So up until now, the design is to cover people, not to cover the organization. So then next probably logical step would be to include the DAO itself. Then if governance deems it priority to develop this insurance structure, this will require a complex setup of legal vehicles. This would require an entity which would be an ecosystem actor. This legal entity will sign the insurance contracts, and this insurance contract will have as beneficiary the participants of MakerDAO. So this is an example on how could that work and insurance levels. Numbers are not real, so it's only an example. So we are in stage 1. We have a self-insurance fund that covers up to 5 million legal defense. In a second entity, we can, in this part, we can go to insurance markets. And with the insurance market, for that, we need a legal entity that is the policy holder. In the latest iteration of HIP 102, we introduced this stakeholder that is like the policy holder. The purpose of this entity is to sign insurance contracts with insurance companies or reinsurance or underwriters. With them, we could get additional coverage, let's say 2x coverage of legal defense. And interestingly, with the same 5 mil, we can use part of it, let's say 1 mil, as first layer for a D&O. So for 5 mil, we get 2x, let's say 10 mil legal defense coverage, and we have 6 mil D&O, only as an example. And this could be extended further in the financial insurance markets. We have talked with Nexus Mutual, with our DeFi protocols, etc. So it could be extended in very interesting ways, depending on what are the priorities. But my point is that this is part of a sophisticated professional risk management strategy and could be deployed in several ways and could be developed to cover other type of risk or other type of stakeholders. So that's what I have for the Legal Defense Fund. So if you have questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you so much for presenting. Actually, I think there are some questions that were asked on the chat. I know there were also other topics that were discussed, but
yeah, I haven't seen the chat yet.
Yeah, is it possible for you to also check the chat, because it is a bit long question? So
okay.
And I must say that I don't have a attractive accent to really read it. I think they will appreciate it if you can just respond, I think. But yeah, so I think there's several questions asked by delegate Bona Publica.
Yeah.
And then
will you clarify the exclusion criteria further? For instance, what constitutes a willful criminal offense and how the conflict of interest is determined? What we are thinking of is, yeah, this is of course like a difficult, like criminal offense. So we don't want, like, if there's a fraud, right, and somebody is accused by fraud, so we don't want to use the funds of the organization to cover that. That is very obvious, right? There are less obvious cases. For example, unfortunately, after OFAC sanctions to Tornado Cash, there is like a gray area, right, where people could be involved in criminal investigations without having a purpose of committing an illegal act. That's why we drafted that in a way that is like willful, like it requires like a will to perform a criminal act, not negligently. So that's like, yeah, when I read that needs to be further developed in the future. We don't want to cover frauds or like very obvious illegal acts, but we also want to cover activities that, unfortunately, because of the gray area that this industry is and will be in the next year, in the next time, we also want to not to exclude everybody. So we drafted in a way that willful, that it would require like a willful will to perform an illegal act, and that should not be included. And conflict of interest, I think one case could be, let's say that there's some type of relation of the, like the technical committee would take we have this decision. It's not like a binding decision, that's why it's like a recommendation, and actually like somebody internal of Maker should have like the control of executing the funds. We don't want to give this control to an external party. And let's say that let's say that it has some relation with the data, or it has some relation with the technical committee. The technical committee will be known members. Yeah, but that's also part of the, like, a general policies of conflict of interest that I think is an important point, and these policies should be developed. But yeah, that's the idea, like very obvious cases where there could be like some conflict of interest. What happened if the resilience technical committee does not provide a payout recommendation within the stimulated 5 working days? Oh, that's a good one. There's nothing regulating this specific case. One possibility would be to have like you have in administrative law like a positive silence or a negative silence. That means if they don't say anything after a certain period of time, it means that their recommendation is negative or positive. That could be a possibility, but that's something that we need to figure out, and we have not yet a rule for this specific case. I have a question about endgame and anonymity related to that. How will ADs engage with this? And if they are anonymous, yeah, so there will be an anonymity requirement. There's an anonymity requirement for ADs, and for applying, ADs will be covered. And for applying, you don't have to dox yourself. You have, and we will put this rule set in the next iteration, in the next MIP 102. The idea is that we are going to develop a proof of eligibility system where the beneficiary or applicant has to prove that they control an address that shows that they have played a specific role. So we will, for example, for ADs could be if ADs have to deploy to delegate contracts, then make them sign a message from this address, for example. That could be. And we are deploying that, but yeah, it would be anon and facilitator. Yeah, so we will, for the specific eligibility for a specific beneficiary group, we are going to develop like required proofs that they belong or they are beneficiary. does the 5 million DAI budget replenish every year, or does it carry forward the balance? That's open also. This 5 million DAI budget, this figure is not arbitrary. This figure came up through the study. They did a model, the risk management company that developed the feasibility study, they came up with this figure. They studied the average cost of legal expenses in the main jurisdictions in the US, in Europe, in other jurisdictions. They make an average. There's a complex model behind that. There are also some, and this information is not there yet, also because there's some risk on that, on some coverage amounts. So there are also some specific rules to avoid that the fund is depleted in case there are many cases in 1 year. So this part is still open. I see it as these 5 million DAI are not like transferred to a multi-sig, are part of the surplus buffer. That means it's more like I see it like drawing rights. So we are not replenishing these funds nowhere, and we avoid in this way like the cross assumptions, the risks of holding SIGs in a multi-sig. So if we are going to have next year, so the current wording makes understand that yes, that next year we'll have 10, and then the year after that we'll have 15. Yeah. What I'm seeing is paradox. Have to docs as to cover us. Yeah. So the topic, yeah, and I was on the refi code night. I was in the refi meeting yesterday night, and they were alluding to the difficulty, and that's why it's important for me to develop standard operational procedures for legal defense of specific person. Okay, that's less difficult, but to get a lawyer to defend Anon or to defend a DAO is much more difficult, but it's not impossible. I know where to get lawyers. So there are crypto lawyer networks like LexPunk from Gabriel Shapiro, or like the guys from LexDAO. They're legal engineers. There is a community of crypto lawyers who is open to explore. It is not impossible to defend an Anon, although it is difficult because of the reasons that they were explaining yesterday. Basically, because lawyers have normally to run conflict of interest, so they don't. And it is important if they defend somebody and you defend a new client, that they are not like defending at the same time like a competitor or something like that. That could be like severe for lawyers. They could lose their license. So that's one of the part. But in that part, and that's why I alluded that this one would be one very important to have an advisory council, because we need input to how to develop this process, because we need this process. We need this process ASAP. We don't want to get caught off guard or to be forced to be reactive. So we need a protocol for legal defense that includes legal defense of Anons and legal defense of the DAO itself. This includes also generation of, you can create documents, like joint defense documents. And I alluded to LexPunk because they have developed open source legal templates on how to engage lawyers if you are a multi-sig, an Anon multi-sig, or a DAO member. Of course, we have to find the profile of legal defenders that are prepared to assume this. It's a risk for them also, but much easier, I guess, of a boutique tech-savvy lawyer than a big law firm. It will be much more difficult. But yeah, so that's one of the hardest things. But I think it's about Cognite to develop processes to hire the lawyers, to sign the agreements, and to provide proper legal defense. The risk of not having proper legal defense is as big as the liability risk. Like, legally speaking, liability risk is probably the most severe legal risk, because we don't have a legal entity, a wrapper, like the DAO doesn't have a wrapper, will not have a wrapper. Now in the structure, many participants have like their own LLC, but that legal entity provides risk mitigation to some risks, but not to every risk. For example, legal entities can provide protection against like civil claims, that certainly, because you're limited, you have limited liability through the entity, but it does not provide risk for like a criminal regulatory. If there's a violation of some regulatory or criminal provision, they will go after the person. So legal entities are part of the tool mix, but not everything. So those are like different components of risk management. And I think we should develop ACAP these processes on how to defend anons and how to defend the DAOs.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And of course, I don't want you to be making it like an AMA. I also know that you're not a busy person, but I'm pretty sure like if you're going to details, like it's probably not enough to just talk about it, right? Like I'm pretty sure there will be another section. But yeah, I mean, actually, I'm glad that you also brought up this point about the advisor, because that also has been some of the focus for a lot of ABC, and you kind of touched on it. And I'm also curious about the special opinion from Rafael as well. Is like, so you kind of touched on like, okay, it's important to have, for example, advisor that can touch on this scope, but it is also very different. As you mentioned, like there are some like crypto law firms, but for advisor, like how would you, for example, think about like advisor being different from like a typical, let's say, legal firm or let's say legal consultant? Or do you think that there's actually a lot of overlapping?
Yeah, I think one of the particularities of the legal world is that, in contrary to, let's say, like the engineer world or the software, or like code is a universal language, and of finance is an universal language. Engineering is an universal language, and the problem with the challenge with legal topics is that it is very, very fragmentized. We have like hundreds of different jurisdictions. We have dozens of different specialization areas. So normally, like good expertise is very, very, very specific and granular to a specific case. Normally, like my experience, like legal people are very good at solving like very specific circumstances, but less good at like having like general type of advice. So I think, like generally speaking, I would look into networks more than particular specialists. They are very interesting, and I mentioned two. One is LexPunk, and the other one is LexDAO. LexPunk, they have like a network of hundreds of lawyers, all crypto proficient. They are developing these templates, these open source templates for providing legal defense, for wrapping multi-sig, creating structures, legal structures around multi-sigs. That also like an important component to reduce like the personal exposure. That's again like personal liability risk. How to reduce personal exposure. So they have a wide array of experts. This idea of having networks as advisors, as advisory council, could be interesting. It was even mentioned in one of the late endgame calls with Runa. So that will be like one thing, like from the type of entities that we want to approach. Also, of course, we will need a specialized lawyer in specific areas. But we can source this from these networks, with the advantage that these networks have specialists in many jurisdictions and in many specialization areas. So that's my first thought. The second thought is that we have to first think, and I think that's part of the discussion currently with the advisory council. I think we have to first think on what is the problem that they're going to solve, and before thinking on what are the requirements. And I have listed some of them, like to not take all the time of this meeting, but I have identified like different areas that I consider important to develop for legal resiliency, and to highlight the most important ones of here. The part of legal defense is, I think, is very important. We need to develop proper processes, standard processes for defending DAOs. I think that you can source these experts from one of these networks. Other part that I consider very important is this last one, this procurement process. I see that, and it not only relates to advisory council, but there's a huge reliance on external contractors. Like most of the workforce will be spinned off to ecosystem actors. So we have a bunch of ecosystem actors, some of them incubated by scope, but directly budget through the scopes. We will have advisory councils. We will have all sort of external players. But what we are missing here is a standard process for hiring for selection. That's one in law, it's called the public procurement law. And as MakerDAO is a public project, so it's managing public good, and it's a currency which is free to use, available permissionless. So it's a public good. So you have a lot of similarities to nation states, and nation states have developed frameworks for contracting for. So it's like the whole life cycle of contracting or buying, purchasing services and products from external parties, which include how do people apply to projects, how do we select, which are the eligibility criteria. The same questions that everybody's asking about the advisory council is for every other contractor. How do they report, how we hire them, how we pay them, all of this stuff. And we could use, so for that, there is like a meta process, a legal governance process. And I think for that one, we could search in one of these networks, because experience in crypto, I think, would be a requirement for that. So we like both things, and the Venn diagram is it will be very reduced. Global expert in public procurement, and B, some like proficiency in DAOs and cryptos. So that's all like my first thought. But first, I think we have to ask the question: what are we going to solve? What topics are we going to develop? What is the priority? And then we can see where to look for them. Can you see if there's something in the chat to mention?
Yeah, and then so once again, thank you so much for joining as the guest speaker. I mean, we're going to talk more of the scope and of course, to contribute as well. But if you have other work or work that you have to go, that's fine. But yeah, so again, thank you so much.
Thank you. There is much more into it, and I like, let's give like a bilateral conversation. Like strategic priority should be given by ABCs, and they're really important to see, what type of advisors are needed to develop these new processes.
Yep, sounds good. And then actually, we have several topics, but I do want to also touch on growth strategy along with this scope, because it is also, I think, one of our job to provide some guidance strategy behind it. I don't think there's a specific voting that relate to this right now, and then I'm just curious for Rafael stuff, but for me, it's like those protections will be really important for growth in the long term. So I can see, like, at least from my perspective, having it as kind of priority.
You are breaking. Sorry, though. You are breaking a lot. I'm not sure if I'm the only one. Yeah.
Sorry about it. If I break up again, I'll just type it. But I was just saying that from growth perspective in the long term, I think it makes sense to at least our ABC to have it as like one of the priorities, because having those legal defense and the clarification can also protect. And then if, for example, maker or maker contributors or the delegates or others, like if they're under attack for contributing to protocol, of course that can be problematic. I can imagine that from growth side, it is something that aligns very well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And also, I think something that sometimes gets misunderstood is that when you have good insurance, you can actually take more risk, right? And so I think having a very good legal resiliency in place will allow maker to act in ways that wouldn't be possible if that's not the case, right? First, on a more informed basis, but also that we know that if something untoward happens, that we have some type of insurance in place will be really good and will help us to unlock some sensible risk taking.
Sure thing. Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And there's a wide array of instruments that we could explore in legal risk management, risk transfer, insurance, financial insurance, captive insurance, mutuals, DeFi. So there's a lot of things that could develop. I see that this would be like an ecosystem actor or as a DAO that holds like specialized funds that absorb specific risks, and we could do it in develop in a very sophisticated way and lead the way in the industry to have a sophisticated and professional legal risk management. So like only this part is like a huge thing, and could even turn like in a cross DAO thing. And there's a lot of interest in what we are doing, as many other projects are thinking or already developing their own legal defense fund. But I see, and this is also like very compatible to like the endgame structure, where the idea is that DAOs will like cover more marginal risk, while maker core will take more detailed risk, and we could structure it in that way. And we can invite external partners to also to deploy capital and cover different type of funds. Of course, there are challenges on the way in the legal structures when you are engaged with insurance companies and other financial institutions. But that's a fascinating thing to explore. Only that part, like professional legal risk management through insurance or other instruments.
Yeah. Also, Rafael makes a good point about privacy and OPSEC. Like, so I heard that the scope has changed, but maybe other delegates know better, because I thought it was there in the beginning, but it has changed to just focus on legal, right?
I don't have changed, but I think it's hugely important, and it belongs to all of this framework, because the purpose of this is to reduce attack vectors. So it will improve the overall resilience of the organization, also to reduce personal exposure. So I think there are three components to that. One is all these pseudonymity and anonymity requirements, and on the policy part, there's also like, there was this discussion like last week, the requirements, anonymity requirements on delegates, how to interpret that, how to enforce that. So we need definitely to put clear rules on that make sense. They require OPSEC and security practice, also important depending on the role that each person plays. Could have like different like risk category that has different. So that part, in the part of the policies, we need to develop that. And there's not only part of the resilience scope, but it's also part of other scopes. But there is also two other components that is important. One is tech, of course, tooling. The SES core unit, the part of the SES core unit, which will be spinned off to an ecosystem actor, we develop the tool, the DAO toolkit. So this is one part. So like how to channel interactions between members through this toolkit, and that is part of this also, to provide tools for digital signatures, signing off messages, for authenticating your address, or sending encrypted messages, or these type of things. So those all belong here. Also, like we having discussions on Discord, how to replace by more sound communication or storage tools. There's also a legal component on that. There are ways like legal tech ways of structuring involvement in like wrapping multi-sigs. So we are starting off, and we're going to probably invite Lexpunk to help us now in the transition, where many core units are going to be spun off to ecosystem actors. How to transition, how to the multi-sig, like multi-sigs in the DAO itself. Like our position was, there are funds from the DAO. The post proxy beneficiary has control over the funds, like legally or tax-wise. It's not like part of the, like, not from the signers of the multi-sig, but in the future that will be different. So maybe they can develop some standards and templates for wrapping. You can wrap multi-sigs around. It could be a legal vehicle, it could be a contract, it could be a trust. Those type of things, I think. So it's a policy part, and it's a tech part, and it's a legal tech part. What team was that? SES will be good meta.
I think I think we just have at the moment a pretty big reliance on like centralized providers that are also like pretty black boxes in terms of data security and data retention and so on and so forth. Like I have no idea how Discord is handling data in the long run. I know that the chat data gets stored for a very long time and is actually not encrypted while on the server. It's just encrypted in flight. And that's kind of worrisome. So I think we really should think long and deep about like breaking some of the dependencies about of this tooling. And I'm looking forward to what SES will come up with, and I'm sure it's going to be great.
But for sure, that will be an important area for advisory council, right? See if, who could give us expertise on the best practices, security practices in tooling, what we can do on the policy level. So that's the question that we have to ask when we think about advisory council, and that is an area that I think that's also should be like a priority. Who could be engaged that could assess us in developing like standard best practices for operational security and privacy. Edward Snowden.
Yeah, he must know a thing or two about OPSEC, I guess.
All right, so we talk about many different topics, but I know that maybe there are some other topics to discuss, but we have like 10 minutes. So especially Rafael or delegates, like, is there any topic that you want to discuss more for today?
For me, it's fine. If delegates have any more questions, I'm of course happy to answer those.
Yeah, I think that there are some delegates ask some questions about some of the polls, the positions. Yeah. Any specific topics that anybody want to discuss before we close it? Okay, that's a long comment, so let me improve my reading skills quick.
Yeah, Janska, I think that's fair by and large. I just think we have to be a little bit careful because basically if we get into the habit of approving polls without any specifics, like I'm totally not worried about STS running away with the money personally, not at all. What I'm really worried about is the precedence of getting polls passed without any substance. I mean, of course, now this comes from a good actor, but we can't run into the habit of facilitators posting polls without any substance and saying, this is going to be fine. I think then this creates just a very bad slippery slope to proposals getting thinner and thinner and thinner, right? And so I think there are ways to mitigate that. Like you can say, hey, I cannot reveal the vendor, I cannot reveal any details, but here is what's going to get developed with some milestones. So that's super easy. Like you can say, by, I don't know, in 3 months, by end of August, we will present something that can do X, Y, Z. And then by that time, we can see, is that milestone developed? Is that being presented or is it not being developed? And then, we can run into the process of, if it's not being developed, then there need to be some penalties, right? So this checks and balance system doesn't work if it's enough to just hand wave a proposal. And I'm not thinking SES. I know these guys will manage the money well. It's the process and the precedence that sets. That's my only concern here going forward, not with this specific call, but I think that you know what I mean, right?
I mean, for me especially, it's like delegates can vote the way they want as long as they can justify how it is aligned with the growth. So because especially for those, like I think it's really up to, like, yes, it's our bias, but I think it also makes sense that delegates can appropriately in a way that they believe is beneficial. In terms of like some of the like politic thing, I mean, I would say that first, like, especially for delegates, like, just have to be like, it's a new requirement. So but at the same time, I think that me telling delegates what to do and stuff also is not something that's like okay. So it's a little bit kind of awkward situation, but including delegates telling other delegates to do this or that, right? So I think overall, like, yes, we're in the early phase, but I think we should just respect each other, and then respect delegates. Kind of like you'll do align your delegates, check them. So yeah, in a good meta, that's also a good point. But at the same time, like when we also create ABC, we also want to kind of broaden the idea of the growth, right? Like because growth can mean multiple things. But for me, it was like if somebody wants a very specific definition of growth, then they are feel free to create another ABC that just focus on it. So I hope that at least the delegates understand my perspective. Right. I think that I mean, I understand, for different delegates, but let's try to not use ABC meetings for especially like encouraging certain votes. I'm also saying it because I also don't want, for example, ABC accidentally kind of frame as such, and also don't want delegates to be framed as such either. Like I think we have to kind of respect the new environment. I hope that's it's okay, and I hope that everybody has a good rest of the week. And any other questions or comments, like we have Discord and also forum for discussion. So Rafael, if there's any other topic they want to discuss, if not, we can maybe close for today.
Yeah, I'm happy to close for today. I just want to say that I totally agree to your point that basically we should use the time of these ABC calls for scope discussions, and that we have the channels for async discussion. I think that's the place for LSTMs.
Yeah, sounds great. Right. Well, then thank you everyone, and then especially thank you, Larry Giro, for being a guest speaker today.
Thank you, very gladly, and get in touch if you want to discuss all these legal residency topics, or if you have a question about the legal defense fund.